Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 444 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our fifth book just came out. It's called Perseverance and How to Be a Great Fraternity or Sorority Alumnus. So I want you to go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority students together. Fun fact, Bill Martin is the past executive director of FIJI, and he's one of the nicest guys you will ever meet. He's always looking to help others and collaborate, and that's what makes fraternity and sorority so special. On a national level, I will tell you from firsthand experience that we all work together. And I think that model needs to be duplicated on local campuses as well. We are much stronger when we stick together, when we work together, and we leverage each other's talents. Speaking of FIJI, let's talk to our next guest. Mike Hassell is educated formally as an engineer from Georgia Tech. He's also a humanist. He got his Vanderbilt Master Liberal of Arts and Sciences and even an executive, a Harvard MBA. Mike Hassell is a Renaissance man and, of course, a brother of FIJI, reflecting on the fruits from 50 years of curiosity and various pursuits in science, history, psychology, and philosophy. Mike co-funded and managed Knowledge Products, an audio publisher of 140 titles on the great ideas of history. During the next 20 years as a senior executive in startup and early businesses, Mike's main hobby was reading widely in nonfiction, accumulating yet more ideas and resources to fold into the book called Deep Tradeoffs. Now, Deep Tradeoffs, this packs into 315 quotes from Aristotle all the way to Stevie Wonder in 200 pages. By thematically connecting these chunks of wisdom in a thoughtful, probing, conversational overview, Mike is able to illuminate eternally conflicting values and truths. He shows how they've been conflicting for millennia and underlie today's raging culture wars. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Great to be here. I'm so pleased to see you. Thank you.
It's great to see you as well. I love seeing Nashville natives. We can certainly agree on some great food in the Nashville area, and I can't wait to talk about that. But before we get there, I know that you decided on Georgia Tech for your undergraduate experience. So why did you choose Tech?
My choices were basically MIT, UT, or Georgia Tech. So MIT was a stretch school. I wanted to be a research engineer. I did not get in. I don't think I came close to getting in, frankly. I was not prepared. Now what I've learned about MIT, I think it would have been a disaster if I had gotten in. UT is a good engineering school. I decided to become an engineer because my uncle had gone there, and he ended up on the group at IBM that created the barcode scanners for retail checkout. So I just wanted to be Bill Steele, basically. And Georgia Tech was a really terrific engineering school, about 5 hours from Nashville, 4.5. And so it was good distance, good place, and it was really a great choice for me.
Yeah, it's a wonderful school. I love the students on campus at Georgia Tech, and it probably was for the best that you didn't end up at MIT. I got to tell you, I went to MIT for a tour with my kids about a year ago, and they basically pointed out that the students at MIT reconstructed a police car at the top of one of the buildings at MIT in the middle of the night. Okay.
Yes.
The entire car.
Yes. Well, they do things like that at Georgia Tech too. It's a prank oriented, engineers are very clever to do things like that. So
very clever indeed. Now you joined FIJI at Georgia Tech. What was special about the group of guys at FIJI that made you want to join them?
Well, first, I almost pledged Delta Tau Delta, become a Delt. And the reason was a graduate came to my home and showed me a calculus book. I thought he was just the greatest guy. And I spent all my freshman rush time over at the Delt house. I was standing there thinking about, I'm going to pledge here in the next couple of minutes. And then I just, at the end, said, I love these upper class guys that I've gotten to know, but I really don't know the pledge class. And I just decided to put it off, and then I didn't pledge anywhere. So in the sophomore year, I had gained some friends on my hall that were going to Fiji. I got a little more experience at the house, and what I learned is that they had quite a national profile. They won the Cheney Cup and some other stuff like that. But these were guys that were going to Harvard Business School and Stanford Business School and becoming doctors, and uh, not uniquely at Georgia Tech, but they were just some people that I wanted to be like. And Oak Ridge natives whose parents were physicists, and they just decided to get a 4.0 and do it. So I loved being around those kind of brilliant people. That was not something I could choose to do.
Nice. Well, it certainly worked out very well for you. And, everything happens for a reason. You didn't go with Delt, you ended up with Fiji, and the rest was a wonderful story. So it all worked
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, it was a great experience, and I got a lot of leadership experience. Where the stakes are low. If you make a mistake, it doesn't really hurt anybody,
Yeah.
but you don't have any power, and you have plenty of opportunity to try to make a difference without power, and that's a great learning experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you're really running a small business while you're in college. This is the time to make mistakes. You won't get fired. Your brothers are going to forgive you. It's
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
so
One of the things I did is when I became president is I inherited a debt, and prior guys had tried to slam the gavel and say we're fining and collecting, and they never got paid. And so I just basically stopped the meeting. I stopped talking, and then the other guys would yell at each other to shut up so we could get to our homework. And I saw that we had unused rooms in the house over the summer, so I said, let's rent them out. They prohibited it after that because there's a bunch wrong with it. Women and men in the same house, and what can go wrong, right? But we raised a few $1,000s that paid off our debt, and it was just thinking outside the box.
absolutely. Yeah, that's always the toughest thing is, making sure that all the debts are collected, that you got everything, all your dues are paid at headquarters, and you still have a little money left over so that way you can buy composites and do all the things you got to do on a local chapter level. And I tell you what, the undergrads, they love to spend money. So one of the most difficult jobs is being the treasurer and making sure that we stick to the budget, because if you
Right.
don't, forget it. The guys would love to spend money on all kinds of frivolous things.
Yes. Right. Right. Yeah.
So, for over 16 years, you were the founder of Conduit Corporation, and basically that starts raw startups in the seed stage in terms of information technology companies. And so, a lot of our listeners, they are all kind of entrepreneurs in the making, that they have these business ideas, these products or services that they want to go to market with after graduation. So, how do you know when business ideas are good ones that are actually worth funding?
It's a fantastic question. And one of the basics is understanding the customer, right? I worked at P&G for a couple of years after undergrad before I went to business school, and they drill into you to understand the customer, not kind of broadly, vaguely, conceptually. Who is the customer? What's his name? What's his phone number? Have you talked to him? When is he going to buy? That level of detail, being intimately familiar with the customer, know his needs better than he does. That's what they drilled into us at P&G. Study the data, go in there and tell them things they don't know about their own business. So, I mean, that's a little overkill, but the concept is directionally correct. Know the customer. The other one is have intellectual property. We were working in information technologies. I had been the entrepreneur in residence at Vanderbilt, creating companies out of their research base. So there are patents and things like that. We spun out this incubator that you've mentioned, and people would walk in the door with ideas because venture capitalists are not ready to see them. They have nowhere to go. And we would partner with them. And so we looked for a way to have intellectual property that made us different and protectable. And it might be a copyright, but more often it was a patent or some process that kept you from competing on price. Because if you're not different, you got to compete on price.
Mhm, mhm.
Differentiation is everything. If you're selling the same thing everybody else has, same product, same service, then it's price is all that's left, and you get beat up. So you're looking for differentiation, looking for intellectual property if you can have it, and your partners who come to you with a business in an incubator need to show some evidence that they know who their customer is.
That is absolutely great advice. I really, really like that a lot. Very good. You're also the author of this book. It's called Deep Tradeoffs: Finding Balance and Respect in a Polarized, Angry World. And we are certainly living in a polarized world, no question about it. The closer we get to the election, the more I believe we are further polarized than ever before. What made you want to write this particular book?
So I, I'm from a family of engineers. I got an electrical engineering degree. I decided to go into management. I felt like I was being trained for a career rather than being educated more generally. So I studied the role of humanities in a technical education. That's really what got me into Harvard. It wasn't my grades, but I was asking a question nobody else in the country was asking. And so that led me to start this publishing business on the great ideas of history. And so late in that project, like 10 years into it, we were doing a series of audio tapes on the moral problems of our age. This is war and terrorism, euthanasia and abortion, drugs, sexuality, all of it. And I had an aha moment at age 40 that these problems are not like the problems I was trained to solve as an engineer. There's no algorithm, there's no formula, there's no process, there's no structure to get to a fixed answer. Instead, what moral problems are, and it turns out relational problems too between people, are colliding priorities, colliding values or principles. Neither one of them are wrong. They can't be resolved to choose one or the other. You need both. Like striving and peace. We all say we want peace, but we fight, we strive, we struggle because we want something better. And that kind of conflict makes things better. But we say we want peace, right? And so that's chapter 1 in my book. And I identified about 30 of these kind of trade-offs. I call them deep because they're more than cost benefit and, pro and con and things we just do all the time, but they're more profound, they're more lasting, and they're more significant in the way they affect our moral lives. So if we're going to respect other people, if we're going to get along with them, we're going to understand them, you need to understand there's not a right answer that we're fighting over to find. It's not available. There's competing priorities that we have to balance and come to agreement in how we live with them. Okay. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think it does make sense. I mean, just to kind of build on that a little bit, listen, I watch the news all the time. There are many things that are going on right now that I don't agree with in this world. And ultimately, I think we have to pick and choose our battles. What are we going to fight for? When should we confront, fight, criticize, resist, protest, or just accept, forgive, respect, yield, and generally mind our own business? I mean, when do we step into action and when do we kind of yield?
Yeah, well, this is the question in the first chapter between peace and striving, right? There's not one answer that applies to all situations. There's good answers that Democrats have. There's good answers that Republicans have. There's good answers that Baptists have. There's good answers that Catholics have. The point is that there's a bunch of good answers to choose from, and the people that disagree with us are not wrong and evil. They have different experiences that lead them in a different direction. And so if we're going to get along with one another, we have to start with that basic respect and place a relationship over a solution. Michael, if you and I like each other, we may disagree with each other, we disagree with our wives, disagree with our kids, we disagree with everybody on something, right? But if the relationship is more profound, you can have a better chance of getting a solution. I mean, if it's more prioritized, is what I meant to say. You have a better chance of loving someone into change rather than shoving them into it.
That's a really good point. It just seems like maybe it was the election, that we went through a number of years ago where I just saw that people who had relationships that I'm talking about lifetime relationships. My dad, for example, he was friends with a guy going back to college, many, many moons ago, and over politics. They basically destroyed the relationship that they had for many, many decades and just said, well, we can't get along with each other. And they decided to essentially unfriend each other on Facebook. And that was the end of it, right? And I think we need to come together. I think that's the only way. And I think ultimately that's what fraternity and sorority teaches us. It teaches us to work with people who are different from each other, who have those different lived experiences. They're not evil. They just have different experiences growing up.
That's right. And, the idea that you have to agree with somebody in order to be their friend is just flawed. It's fallacious.
Yeah.
Like I said, we disagree with everybody that's most important to us. Right. And so it's a misconception that we have to agree first before we can be friends. We be friends first, then we can we're more likely to be able to resolve our differences.
One of the criticisms I think against me is that people always look at me as the glass half full guy. I'm always optimistic. I'm eternally optimistic. It's just part of my DNA. Is that too idealistic to be optimistic like that? Or, should I be more realistic and be more cynical and pessimistic in life?
That is really a conflict between imagination and reality. We all have ideals and things that we think ought to be realized the way the world ought to be.
Mhm.
Some people think there ought to be no capitalism. Some people think there ought to be no money, right? Some people think there ought to be no government. And those things are often very unrealistic, right? And I think we need to come to terms with what's achievable. Some of the things that we want are profoundly offensive to other people. They're not going to agree to it. The more we insist on it, the more we're laying groundwork for a fight.
Mhm.
So it's a challenge, to think what's possible in turning our imagination into reality. By the way, that's how we get better. Science fiction does this very well and imagines submarines, VCRs, a bunch of things that have elevators that have come to fruition because somebody conceived it first in their imagination. So
Mhm.
it's a powerful motive or force for change, but some of it's not feasible. Technology changes and it makes things feasible. So this is actually the second chapter of my book. After peace and struggle is imagination and reality.
Got it.
People have started utopias because they thought they could make a perfect society and they failed within a year or two. They always fail because human nature is not perfect.
Yeah, that's definitely true. When I think about the fraternity and sorority system and I think about the values of my fraternity, we talk about truth and justice. And now we're coming into this election cycle where I think, truth is going to be a very interesting word because I think different people look at it through different lenses. And we still have this theme that we talk about honesty, that honesty is the best policy. But why are people deceptive? And why are people deceptive even to themselves? Is there a certain time when deception is necessary or even beneficial?
Well, yes. I mean, we lie all the time to keep from hurting people, to survive, to keep from being coerced, to keep from having our privacy invaded. And we don't really think that's wrong because there's another value that's more important, right? So the point here is we think truth may be our ultimate value. It's not. You can see it in the way we behave. We lie to our children about Santa Claus. Okay. Well, there's a higher value, which is to bring them joy, to exercise their imagination. And none of us really feel bad about it because I think we intuitively sense there's a higher end than telling the truth in that circumstances. Michael, if you came upon somebody in an accident who's bleeding out and they're going to die, you're likely to tell them something like, I'm here with you, it's going to be okay. Calm them down. It's not going to be okay. They're going to die. But you wouldn't feel a second qualm about telling them because it's a duty of care, right? A duty not to harm. So there are other things that often win over truth, and we're dishonest with ourselves about how likely we are to succeed, how good we are. We need other people to tell us a little more objectively those things.
Yeah, you make some great points. I never really thought about those situations, like talking about Santa or comforting somebody when they're about to die.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. I never really thought about it, but you're absolutely right. And certainly conflict is very much a part of today's fraternity and sorority chapters. I'll give you a perfect example. I was actually speaking in New York about a year ago, a very liberal part of that particular state. And there was a woman who approached me after one of my programs, and she said, "Mike, great talk, love it, but I'm having a problem with my chapter." And she explained that at this time they were kind of going through the election cycle. And she was, a very steadfast Republican, and she was very out and open about her views. The rest of her sisters, they were all Democrats, very liberal minded. And the liberal minded sisters basically explained to this one sister, you're not allowed to open your mouth, because if you start talking about, conservatism and Republican values, then you're going to scare away all of the new members. No new members are going to want to join our sorority. Okay. And she didn't know what to do. She felt like she couldn't talk. I mean, she literally could not voice her opinion in her own sorority. So, what is the best way to manage conflict in our fraternity and sorority chapters?
Well, we can start by understanding that conflict is healthy.
Mhm.
It's not the problem. Coercion is the problem. And the example you just told is the heavy degree of coercion there. You can't talk, right?
Right.
Well, I'm a human being. I can talk. We live in a country that prizes talk. And how are we going to resolve our differences if we don't even speak them? So, fraternities are a great place to learn how to manage conflict. We had drug problems and people doing things that caused legal exposure and sometimes physical exposure with fires and things like that. You manage conflict there. It's a great kind of laboratory for doing it, because you're going to spend the rest of your life doing it if you're in business. And I'll just tell you, I was leaving a gym one time and somebody stopped and said, we were gathering advice for young kids, about to graduate from high school or something. What would you tell them? And I said, learn how to manage conflict,
Mhm.
because you're going to have conflict. And it's the same advice I give to people that are about to be married. It's not going to be happiness ever after. It's going to be great. And I've been happily married 42 years, never had a temptation to break that up. But there's conflicts along the way, and respect for your partner, and sometimes they help you become a better person when you're not seeing things the right way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe that's why we see so many successful people come out of fraternities and sororities, is that they are able to manage conflict. And I do think about the origin of our fraternities and sororities, very much literary societies in the late 1800s, and they were debating things all the time. The things that they couldn't talk about on a college campus, they took it to the fraternity house and did a debate off campus. And I think
Right.
those skills, hopefully we don't lose that. Hopefully we don't forget that. I think that that's incredibly important, that we continue to debate the issues of the day. And at the end of the day, we're all going to come together as brothers and we're all going to move forward. But I think it's healthy to see that debate. Sometimes I've even seen chapters basically not want the new members to sit in on the chapter meetings because they don't want the new members to see brothers, disagreeing. And I'm like, that's the best part about fraternity. What do you
That's
mean?
how you learn.
That's how
That's how
you
you learn.
learn.
Yeah.
Right. Like
And I've always,
why would you not want your new members to see that?
yeah, I've always hated authority as the way people try to solve problems, because it doesn't work.
Yeah,
Incentives are way better. Try
right.
to align to encourage people to go the right way, and they won't always, but it's a lot better than beating up on them. A carrot's much better than a stick.
I completely agree, but for some reason in fraternity and sorority, we love to hand out fines. We're like Oprah Winfrey, you get a fine, you get a fine, you get a fine. It doesn't work, but they're still been doing it for the last 100 years. I don't know
Yeah,
why.
yeah. There's a story that occurs to me. I'll just tell you briefly. A few years ago, someone pointed out to me that our chapter at Georgia Tech, the FIJI chapter, had someone go to either Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School, one per year for a decade. Okay, and this is like out of what, 200-300 people over a decade, maybe 400, but it's a small group, one fraternity on one campus with that record. And so the question is why? So I called them all up and asked them why, and it boils down to this: you need analytical power to get in a good business school. Same as a good law school. You have to show your horsepower analytically, right? But
Mhm.
you also have to get along with people. Engineers often are not great at this. They're not personal and political. They think of it as kind of beneath them. Some do. The best engineers have great communication skills and social skills
Yep.
and the analytical horsepower. Okay, so that's two legs on the stool. The third leg is setting yourself apart in some kind of innovation or invention or nonprofit that you start, or something that shows you thinking outside the box. You're not just following orders and handing in the required response, but that you're analyzing, critiquing, looking for ways, and acting to make things better. Those three things will get you in a top graduate school.
Yeah,
That's
100%
what I
agree
heard
with
from
that.
that survey. Yeah,
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of the social skills and the communication skills. A lot of times that's the piece that's missing. And I think that's where fraternity and sorority can come in to kind of, help to facilitate those social and communication skills and get the kids out of the phones and actually communicating with each other. And I think if you can do
exactly.
that, then those other two
Exactly.
pieces, hopefully you have those.
Yeah.
And if you don't, go and get them. But the social and communication skills, that's what I see lacking most. And a lot of times, I think a lot of it has to do with our phones and social media, that we're just conditioned to communicate with that device and go on dates by swiping right or swiping left instead of having conversations like you and I did.
Intimate situations don't usually involve phones. you
Yeah,
know,
last time I checked.
if
Right.
I'm going to kiss my wife, the phone's put down, right? And so you're not going to be have very good relationships if they're always mediated through some kind of device.
Right, right.
We
Absolutely.
didn't have that problem when I was in college. I'm old enough that that's more recent, but there's a guy, psychologist named Jonathan Haidt's got a new book coming out of this about the vast destruction that phones are creating, especially for teenage girls who are
Yes.
sensitive to unlikes and things like that. And there's got to be some changes because it's creating a lot of mess.
It is. It's creating all kinds of mental health issues if you're constantly comparing yourself to somebody else's best day on Instagram, where the photo is usually, manipulated in some way anyway.
Yeah, right,
It's not even real half the time.
right.
So,
People don't
yeah.
believe their own stuff that they put up. So.
Yeah, exactly. Unbelievable. Well, listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. And I know that you live in Nashville, and I love trying out new restaurants in Nashville. It seems like every time I go to town, there's a new restaurant opening up that I knew nothing about. And there was like a new building that popped up, last week that I've never seen before in my life. It just appeared out of nowhere. Where should I go for a great meal in town in Nashville?
I think about this in kind of three levels. There's just places like the Catbird Seed, and their chefs go out to Locust and Bastion. They're $200 or $300 each. If you want this kind of consummate experience that most people do on an expense account when they're traveling here, that's one thing.
Right.
Susan and I usually go out to ethnic restaurants.
Nice.
They're just such terrific variety, and it's like traveling. You just experience things you never experienced, and it's cheap. There's some local native stuff like the hot chicken, Hattie B's and Butcher and Bee and some of those places. But what I find most interesting is the restaurants that are playing on the theme of meat and three.
Okay.
The old Southern tradition of a meat and three vegetables. And, Arnold's is a great place for just exactly that. It's mostly lunch. But, Manit Chauhan, one of the Food Network people, came here, and her Indian restaurant is organized around that. You get the meat and three different Indian vegetables. Nothing like I'd ever seen in the South. But it's a really creative and interesting way of combining cultures.
Yeah.
And some other people do that too. Loveless, has got those biscuits and vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
Puckett's does that, and some barbecue places do it. So there's a range from expensive and highly refined, ethnic, cheap, fantastic, delicious, and then a bunch of stuff in the middle.
Yeah, those are all great places. I have been to Manit Chauhan's restaurant. We go there quite often. It is absolutely delicious. It's not terribly expensive, but it really is incredible food, and she's a great chef. So absolutely 100% agree. Really, really nice. I'll have to meet you and your wife over there at Manit Chauhan's restaurant, and we'll go grab dinner sometime soon.
We would love it.
Yeah, this is good. All right. So if our listeners, if they want to go and buy your book, the book is called Deep Tradeoffs: Finding Balance and Respect in a Polarized, Angry World. Or maybe they want to invite you to come and speak on their college campus. Where should they go to connect with you?
Well, it's available on Amazon. Bookstores have to order it. There's too many books to carry, and so they can get it. But the better place is Amazon. I have a website called deeptradeoffs.com, mysteriously enough. And my email is mike@deeptradeoffs.com if somebody wants to email me there. And it's basically a placeholder. It's has some quotes from people and refers people to Amazon if they want to buy the book. But it's only 200 pages, and it's pretty rich. And somebody's interested should read the reviews on Amazon, because I think you give a pretty good reflection of what the book accomplishes.
Very nice, Mike. All right. So it's deeptradeoffs.com. And this has been a wonderful conversation. I hope everybody runs out and goes and picks up your book on Amazon. If they have any questions, go to Amazon, read the reviews, and you're going to see that Mike is the real deal. Mike, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
It's been a real joy. I appreciate it and look forward to meeting you.
Sounds good. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Mike, I want you to like it and I want you to share it with other college students, other fraternity and sorority members in your chapter. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time on the Fraternity Foodie Podcast.